Cost of living, security, these are important issues. If we don't talk about them, the campaign cannot happen normally.
Further south in Aigues-Mortes, the supporters of Marine Le Pen were equally concerned about Emmanuel Macron's double role as candidate and president.
Emmanuel Macron has transformed himself into the head of the army, which is a position that's rarely used. So it's covering up the entire campaign.
I think the elections need to be postponed by 6 months.
In Lyon, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's rally, his far-left supporters want the campaign to shift gears entirely.
It's really hard to engage potential supporters and activists.
I'd really like to hear more about the climate crisis, especially after the latest major climate report.
On the left and on the right, Emmanuel Macron's critics say he's hiding behind the war in Ukraine to keep from campaigning. But for his supporters, that is off the mark.
The president is absolutely not responsible for Ukraine.
He was elected based on the merits of his platform, so I don't see why his legitimacy would be called into question.
With just over a month to go, presidential candidates are facing the unique challenge of trying to win over voters, while many are preoccupied by fears of war.
And that's it for this edition. Do stay with us here on France 24 for our special ongoing coverage of the war in Ukraine.
Breaking news on France 24 and France24.com.
France 24, your window on the world.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. They observe. They contact us. They report, film, photograph. They are the voice of the voiceless. Your eyes in the far-flung reaches of the world. The observers, a network of 5,000 committed citizens working with France 24.
One of our observers in Côte d'Ivoire, Gaspard.
Amateur footage and testimonials checked by our journalists and broadcast weekly on The Observers, on France 24 and observers.france24.com.
I'm Gulliver Cragg, France 24's correspondent in Kiev. I'm forever crisscrossing Ukraine, Poland and other countries in the region to keep you up to date with all the news from Central and Eastern Europe. Join me on Live from Paris and in all France 24's news and magazine programmes.
Gulliver Cragg, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
As fighting continues, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warns of new Russian attacks for the capital Kyiv and the historic southern port city of Odessa. Russia once again proposing a ceasefire to help evacuate key cities, but Kyiv rejects the so-called humanitarian corridors that lead either back to Russia or to its ally Belarus. And Turkish officials say Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov have agreed to meet in Turkey this Thursday. This is another round of talks between Ukraine and Russia gets underway in Belarus. Hello and welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Annette Young. But first, and on day 12 of the war in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky says he expects a renewed bombardment of major cities by Russian troops. This as heavy fighting continues in the Kiev suburb of Irpin as residents scramble across the river to flee Russian shelling. In the meantime, a new Russian ceasefire proposal to allow civilians to flee key cities has been branded as being completely immoral by Ukraine. And also this Monday, another round of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia is being held in Belarus. Now, in the meantime, French President Emmanuel Macron has criticised what he's called hypocritical rhetoric and cynicism from Moscow about offering to open those so-called humanitarian corridors to Russia for Ukrainian civilians. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Les couloirs humanitaires, soyons clairs.
Humanitarian corridors, let's be clear, are the possibility to get these women and men out. Russia is pleading to create humanitarian corridors to Russia. I don't know many Ukrainians who want to go to Russia as a refugee. It's hypocrisy. So this communication I disapprove of.
And France 24's Valerie de Kim is across the latest developments on this continuously changing story. First of all, Valerie, bring us up to speed as to what's happening on the ground in Kyiv.
So since the start of the invasion, Russian forces have pushed into areas north and northeast of Kyiv, the objective being to surround the capital and capture the capital, Kyiv. Now, Kyiv at the moment remains under Ukrainian control. Ukrainian forces have managed to slow Russia's advance in the capital. And not only that, we hear from a senior U.S. defense official saying that Russian forces don't appear to be making a lot of progress on the Kyiv in Kyiv, despite the fact that they have committed 95% of their forces inside the country already. So let me show you a map of what's happening around Kyiv and 4 major towns, small towns surrounding Kyiv, where fighting has intensified since this morning. So you see 4 small towns: Bucha, Ostomel, Vorzel, and Irpin on that map. So intense shelling has continued since this morning. Even the mayor of Kyiv has accused Russia of deliberately targeting civilians. And so in Irpin, we know that at least 4 people, including a mother and her 2 children, died on Sunday. They were killed in an airstrike after a bridge that was being used by civilians to escape towards Kyiv was struck by mortar shelling. So we have footage of that area where the strike took place. It has been verified, and you see the aftermath of the scene there, the destruction, a fire breaking out, the debris of that strike, and just for you to understand the context of what happened there, Ukrainian forces had blown up that bridge to slow the advance of Russian forces, and so people essentially had to make a run for it and cross an area that was pretty much exposed street where that attack took place. And so Really, you can see the human toll of this war. And just the New York Times, journalists from the New York Times, they witnessed the scene. They took photographs of what happened, and that made it on their front page with this terrible photograph of a mother and her two children dying dead on the ground.
And can you bring us up to speed about what's happening elsewhere across Ukraine?
Right, so some developments on the northern front of Ukraine. Ukraine forces saying this Monday that its forces had retaken control of the town of Chuyiv in the northeast. It's been the site of heavy fighting for days. Also, new developments on the southern front in Ukraine. We've heard of reports of a large explosion on the outskirts of the coastal city of Mykolaiv overnight. This as Russian troops continue to push to take the city. It's a strategic city on the way to the city of Odessa. And just this morning, Zelensky confirming that heavy shelling had taken place in Mykolaiv overnight in residential areas. So the latest we are hearing as well on the southern front is that Ukrainian forces have retaken the airport in Mykolaiv, that according to the regional government in that area. So no flights are operating, of course, at the moment at that airport, but Russian forces have been pushed out.
Valerie de Kim, thank you for that. Now, excuse me, in the southern port city of Odessa, residents are getting ready for a Russian assault. If the army were to take control of the city, they would have total control of the Black Sea, controlling imports in and out of the country. Leo McGinn reports.
The biggest port city in Ukraine, Odessa is preparing itself for a Russian assault. Residents form a human chain, passing sandbags back and forth, all to help protect their city. Odessa is located on the Black Sea, and after the Russian army took the port cities of Kherson and Mariupol in recent days, taking Odessa would give them total control of the seafront.
If they cut off Odessa, Kherson, Crimea, it means that Ukraine actually turns into a landlocked country. Lots of Ukrainian exports are coming down the south. There was also the discussion about whether they're trying to stretch out the Ukrainian forces, forcing them to also, fight in the south. There is the assumption that after Mariupol, they will carry on and they will be going on to Odessa in order to sort of create this sort of cutting Ukraine off from its basically controls of the sea.
If the Russians were to gain sole control of the Black Sea, they could block all imports heading for Ukraine. A city of strategic importance, the final frontier before taking Kiev. But it's not even a possibility for the inhabitants of Odessa to lie down and roll over.
Odessa has always been a part of Ukraine and always will be. With such a large unit, nothing can harm us.
We are staying. Odessa is our hometown. We must hold on and hope for victory.
Fishing nets turned into camouflage, and Molotov cocktails in their thousands. The city is ready to defend itself.
And Russian troops are continuing their heavy shelling of cities across the country. These drone images showing the impact of Russian bombardment on Borodyanka, 60 kilometres north of Kiev. As a result, the Ukrainians are adapting their military response as the war continues. Monty Francis are taking a closer look at the military strategies of both sides.
A civilian airport in the city of Vinnytsia lies in ruins, destroyed by Russian airstrikes.
The airport in Vinnytsia is not far from Kiev. They shelled it to prevent any supply of munitions and humanitarian assistance directly to the capital. And we see this repeatedly, airstrikes on airports in Zhytomyr, in Uman, and other places.
In southern Ukraine, Russia has damaged a crucial pipeline, leaving some 700,000 people without heat as temperatures dip below 0 degrees Celsius. It's part of Russia's military strategy in Ukraine to target the country's civilian and military infrastructure, to encircle cities and bombard them with airstrikes. But military experts say it's a strategy that is not working effectively so far in the capital of Kyiv.
Ukrainian population and soldiers have prepared the defense of Kiev, and to fight inside a city is really difficult.
Experts say taking Kyiv is proving difficult for the Russians because of the Ukrainian strategy in the war to fortify the capital by cutting off access to the Russians with roadblocks and barricades. Ukraine is also using defensive missiles to shoot down Russian aircraft and using armed drones to target Russian tanks. The Ukrainians have also blocked airport runways to prevent Russian aircraft carrying troops from landing. Most military experts say Ukraine is fighting an uphill battle, but has surprised even Western intelligence that had predicted the capital would fall within days.
And Turkey has announced that Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov will meet in Antalya this Thursday. This is another round of talks that's taking place between Ukraine and Russia in the Belarusian city of Brest. However, in a phone conversation with the Turkish President, Vladimir Putin said the conflict would only stop if Ukraine stopped fighting and Russia's demands were met. Now, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister telling France 24, however, that he still has hopes for a diplomatic solution. Now, in the meantime, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has sought to reassure Washington's Baltic state allies on a visit to the region. This as he heard concerns that Russian President Putin could go beyond his invasion of Ukraine in redrawing the borders of Europe. Blinken's spending the weekend in Ukraine's neighbours, Poland, Moldova, before visiting Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, all, of course, being former Soviet states. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We will defend every inch of NATO territory against aggression coming from anywhere at any time. Our commitment to Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, is ironclad. The President has called it sacrosanct, and no one should have any doubt about that.
Let's cross now to Katavan Gorjestani in Washington, D.C. Katavan, so what are the next moves from Washington?
Well, there are two main ideas that the Americans are currently working on. One is this idea of sending fighter jets to Ukraine. Now, this is not going to be directly from the U.S. To Ukraine. There will be an intermediary, if you will. That would likely be Poland. And the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, actually said that the principle of it all was given the green light. The question is now to find how exactly they're going to do that. The idea being that the Poles would be sending their own Soviet-era fighter jets to the Ukrainians, one, because they can do it directly, the other being that those planes are fighter jets that the Ukrainians actually know how to fly. They desperately need help in the skies. So the Poles would be sending those fighter jets to the Ukrainians. And then the question is, how does the U.S. backfill those jets going from Poland to Ukraine so that Poland is not left without a full